go to the internet. And those are wonderful things, but going to Google for answers on the things we're going to talk about this morning probably isn't the best approach. You're not going to get a biblical answer in the top 100 listing of Google answers on those questions. But I do want you to go to the internet, okay? And there's a great resource available for you, and it's at creation.com. This is CMI's website. So if anything that I say today, this morning, sparks an interest in you, leads to follow-up questions, or if any time during the week something you hear on the news doesn't quite line up with what you know to be true in the Bible, go to creation.com. Type that question in the search bar, and probably one of the more than 14,500 articles will already answer that question for you. It's possible that you might have one that isn't quite answered exactly right. Well, we've got a team of scientists on staff. Our main office is in Georgia. And if you ask a question that you can't find the answer to on the site, send an email. And the full-time guys will take that, research it. Maybe it'll become an article or a book one day as well. So I'm not based in Georgia. My daughter and I came from Maine on Friday. We went halfway, and then we spoke at a youth group in town last night, and now we're at a couple of different churches here this morning and this evening. So we had a long drive, but we're pleased to be here. It's fantastic weather because you guys are about a month ahead of us in spring. The buds haven't come out yet. There's still piles of snow around, so it was really nice to get here and see full spring weather. All right, so here we go. We're in church. Let's start with a couple of verses that are key to what we're going to look at this morning. The first is 2 Corinthians 10:5. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion. Every lofty opinion, really, evolution is one of those lofty opinions, and everything that revolves around that or that is encompassed by that is one of those lofty opinions because it's raised against the knowledge of God about where we came from on a biblical account. And we need to take every thought captive to obey Christ. So that's a key one. These lofty opinions, dinosaurs, and how the world views dinosaurs is related to this and fits into that perfectly. 1 Peter 3:15, that's sort of the main verse that apologists use because it talks about defending our faith. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. That's the reason that we do all of this. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone or everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. The reason for the hope that we have. It doesn't explicitly say we're just doing this as it relates to creation and evolution. But part of the reason for the hope we have is because God created everything, created us and the world around us, and that is related to the hope we have in Christ. The last part is really key, though. Do this with gentleness and respect. So when we're answering questions, when we're talking to people that have a view different than us, we really need to be respectful of the question they have. You can't argue someone into agreement with you. It doesn't work that way. So do this gently and respectfully. And lastly, I invite you to engage your mind in worship this morning. We're all familiar with Mark 12:30. Love the Lord your God with your whole being, with everything you have, your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. When I became a Christian, the people that I hung out with, when they found out I was going to church, their assumption was, and they didn't explicitly say this, but the way they approached it was they assumed that I left my brain at the door when I walked in, right? Just accept everything with blind faith. Don't think about it. But that's not what this verse is saying. Engaging our minds is a form of worship. Asking questions and seeking answers from God is a way to worship Him. And we're going to ask and answer a lot of questions today, and I hope some of the things I say spark even more questions for you, and that you spend some time this week on that website. You remember what that was? Creation.com. They're really crafty with the way they name it, so easy to remember. I hope that is a way that you can engage your mind as a form of worship all through the week. So let's start with a little pop quiz. Which of these creatures has been around the longest? The pelican, the dolphin, T-Rex, or Finding Nemo? Which has been around the longest? Just come up with an answer in your head. You don't have to yell it out. A, B, C, or D. Which has been around the longest? Now, from a biblical perspective, really how you answer that question depends on what your viewpoint is. And from a biblical perspective, here's the 6 days of creation. And you can answer the question A, B, C, or D just based on this. Day 1, God created the heavens and the earth. Day 2, he separated the water, created the expanse. Day 3, caused dry land to appear. Day 4, placed the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky. Day 5, birds of the air, fish of the sea. And day 6, all land creatures, including dinosaurs and us. So go back to the pop quiz. Which one has been around the longest? A, C, and D beat out T-Rex by 1 day from a biblical perspective. Now, I know that if I hadn't been talking about this in a biblical perspective, if I just saw you, at a restaurant or downtown and I asked the question, I bet almost all of us our mindset would be that T-Rex was around the longest, because that's what we've been conditioned to think about when it comes to dinosaurs. We think long periods of time. What else comes to mind when I use the word dinosaur? When you heard there was a dinosaur talk, what popped into your head? Jurassic Park, right? Big, ferocious, man-eating, people-eating, meat-eating animals devouring anything and everything in their path. That's what comes to mind, right? These large, huge beasts. We also think in terms of millions of years and evolution when it comes to dinosaurs. Why do we do that? Right. Everything. School. I say newspaper, but they're not as popular these days. So we'll just say the internet. School, the internet, the news, TV, movies, museums, and school from little kids, K-3, all the way up to university, PhD. That is why we think long-term when it comes to dinosaurs. That's what we're taught. I don't know how many of you have questioned that as you were growing up or in recent times, but we think this way because that's what we're taught. Now, actually, let me go back one. Do you know what the time frame is for dinosaurs in the evolutionary point of view? Does anybody know how long ago they went extinct? So you say 65? That's it. 65 million years ago is the general thought of when they went extinct, and they were alive 250 million years ago to 65 million years ago. That's kind of the viewpoint that is put out there. But as a Bible-believing Christian, think back to 1 Corinthians 10:5, we need to take every thought captive to obey Christ. This is one of those lofty opinions that is worth taking a look at from a biblical perspective to see how things line up. So here's some questions that are common when we really talk about dinosaurs from a biblical perspective. First, did they exist with humans at the same time? Short answer is yes, but it's important to know why, and to know why does the other side, so to speak, think differently. What does the Bible itself say about dinosaurs? Is the word dinosaur in the Bible? How could all the dinosaurs fit on the ark? If we say yes to those questions and we agree from a biblical perspective, then we got to reconcile how all those animals fit on the ark. What did they eat? Doesn't the fossil record prove millions of years? And maybe something really just as simple as how are fossils made in the first place? I'm not going to get through all these questions in 45 minutes, so don't worry. We'll go through as many as we can, and this is sort of informal, so I might skip around in the presentation depending on the time. But let's take a look at this picture, this depiction. Is there anything wrong with it? See some heads shaking. I think I might see a couple nodding. Some aren't moving because they don't want me to ask them a question. Don't be afraid. It depends on your perspective. Okay? From the worldly perspective, from what I learned growing up in science class, this is clearly wrong because there's a human and a dinosaur depicted together, and that didn't happen. But from a biblical perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. So it's important to understand how our views change depending on what that perspective is. And I hope that you will develop a biblical worldview and look at something like this and say, no, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, it's hard to unlearn things that we've been taught for years and years. So let's look at it again. Biblically speaking, Genesis 1:25 and 1:26, plainly written. God made the wild animals according to their kinds. And then God said, let us make man in our image. That means, biblically speaking, God created humans and dinosaurs on the same day. We existed together. That is not what, if you leave this facility this afternoon and go talk to the average person in town, that is not what they believe. Okay, but biblically, that's where it comes from. And so I don't know if you've ever done this and tried to have a conversation with someone about a biblical truth, someone that doesn't believe the Bible in the first place. It's really hard to use the Bible as a way to share something with them when they don't rest on its authority in the first place. So the next few slides, I'm not going to talk about the Bible at all. We're just going to look at worldly evidence around us as it relates to dinosaurs. And the book that I'm going to use as an example, I've got several copies of it on the book table. It's called Dire Dragons, a story of dinosaurs and man together. And as I said, or you guys said, dinosaurs roamed the earth 250 million years ago and went extinct 65 million years ago. Do you know when the evolutionary viewpoint is or timeline is for us coming on the scene? About 300,000 is when humans evolved. Drastically different time frames. So take a look at this. So we'll go look at a jade carving around 2000 BC in China. What does that look like? Looks like a dinosaur. Even if you don't know the name of the dinosaur, it has dinosaur-like features. You can look at the frill around the top, the beak on its, or the horn on its beak, the way the toes are shaped, just the way it's shaped, it looks like a dinosaur, possibly a single-horned ceratopsian. And this is from China, 2000 BC. Same time frame, another jade carving. And again, even if you don't know what the name of the dinosaur is, it looks dinosaur-like. Okay, the shape of the back and the tail, and again, that frill around the top. This is possibly a juvenile Protoceratops. Now we can go a little bit newer in the time frame. This is thought to be a square wine vessel, again in China. The Great Bronze Age started around 1700 BC, so we're a little bit newer. And if we zoom in on the creature that's hanging off the side of this bronze wine vessel, again, what's it look like? Well, it looks like a dinosaur. The shape of the neck and the tail, possibly very much the same as a Camarasaurus that we've discovered. We can switch places. This is an ancient Mesopotamian cylinder, a seal. And you can look at those creatures that are intertwined on the seal. Again, looks like a dinosaur. And the dinosaur it is most similar to is a Tranostropheus. So again, we're a little bit newer in time frame. Now we can go to Cambodia. We're switching all over the place. Cambodia, about 1200 AD. Zoom in on the ruins of this temple. We get a creature that looks like this on the side. What's it look like? Stegosaurus. It looks like a dinosaur. And again, even if you're not familiar with the different types, you would probably say, oh, that looks like a dinosaur. We don't have creatures like that now. But you look at the ridges on its back, looks an awful lot like a Stegosaurus. And so folks have taken a resin cast of it to get a little bit more detail. So this is 12th century Cambodia. Now we'll go really basically just 500 years ago. Bishop Bell's tomb. And there's a bunch of brass engravings around this tomb. We've got a bat, fish, dog with a collar, and a bird. And we also have this engraving. We've got a creature, two creatures. Again, their necks are intertwined, and you notice how the tail is hanging in the air. It certainly looks like, when they enhanced it, it certainly looks like could be possibly a Shawnosaurus. Now, when dinosaurs were first discovered and we started digging through the fossils and trying to piece it all together, they all thought that the tail was dragging on the ground of the creatures that they found. Clearly in this image, It's showing that tail being up in the air. And we also haven't found drag marks in the sauropod trackways either, which would lend itself to actually it being up in the air. So my question is, I've shown you, some stuff from China, Cambodia, Mesopotamia, as well as England. And the question is, if the evolutionary story of dinosaurs is true, that 250 to 65 million years ago, if that's true, then these creatures should have died out 64.7 million years before we were around to know what they looked like. So how could their images, in this case, be engraved on a 500-year-old tomb in northern England? It doesn't make a lot of sense from that. Okay, even Dennis the Menace has discovered the same thing, right? Now, remember the gentle and respectful. I don't mean to be sarcastic if your view is different than this. Just trying to lighten the mood a little bit. But it is important to think through that. I haven't talked about the Bible at all, right? I've just said evolutionary view is 250 to 65 million years ago. Humans did not come around until 300,000 years ago. 64.7 million year difference. How do these civilizations know, or these cultures know, what to carve? And we have a bunch of different types of dinosaurs that I've shown. And in that book, there's dozens and dozens more. The only conclusion that I can draw from this evidence is that dinosaurs weren't that old and humans were there with them. They knew what they looked like. So now let's go biblical and ask the question, what does the Bible itself say about dinosaurs? And a lot of the information I'm using for this is actually also one of the books that I have out front. This is a relatively new one, probably within the last 6 months. It's a very, it's almost like a dinosaur encyclopedia, right? There's some parts in there that are definitely for kids with lots of pictures, but a lot of it is for us to actually learn. It's well written, and it tells the whole story of how to interpret dinosaurs through a biblical lens. But let's look at the history of this. Try to imagine what it would have been like when the fossils were first discovered. You're out back, you're excavating something, digging, doing something for construction, whatever it is, you discover some massive bone. They don't know anything that we know now. How would you interpret what it is that you've seen? Does anyone know the time frame on when fossils were first discovered? Just out of curiosity. Maybe there's some dinosaur scholars in the room too. I had to do a lot of study for this over the last couple of years because I wasn't that interested in dinosaurs, to be honest, until I started doing these talks and realizing that this topic points to the biblical account as well as anything else. It was actually, most of that work was done in England in the 1800s, around that time frame. It wasn't 1500s and up through. So it was relatively recently that we've started discovering these bones and interpreting them in that lens. And the first guy that is credited with discovering dinosaurs is Robert Plot. And he found this massive piece of a femur, 20 pounds, the piece of a femur. And you know what he attributed it to? A giant human. He didn't know what it was. Now, later on, when more and more discoveries were made, they attributed that bone to a megalosaurus. But he didn't know what it was at the time, right? 1677 is when that first discovery happened. But most of the discoveries of dinosaurs was in the 1800s. And it's actually William Buckland that is credited with a lot of those discoveries. He's sort of the father of dinosaurs. But they didn't really know what they were seeing, what they were looking at. Going a little bit further forward, in the mid-1800s, Sir Richard Owen is the man who was credited with coining the phrase dinosaur. In 1841, he, put in quotation marks, invented that word. In Greek, it means terrible lizard. Dinosaura. Dinosaur was born, so to speak. And that's the word that has hung on since that time. But it means terrible lizard, these big creatures. So the first question I was asking in this section is, what does the Bible say about dinosaurs? So if you open your Bible and you go to the concordance and you search for dinosaur, you won't find the word anywhere. The reason is because of what's on the screen. Look at the time frame when our versions of our Bible came in. King James, 1611. There's over 230 years between when that translation occurred and when the word dinosaur was even invented. So it makes sense for dinosaur not to be in the Bible, for that word not to be used. But that doesn't mean the Bible doesn't describe and talk about dinosaurs. Right? I've already said, thinking biblically, day 6 is when God created all the land creatures. So dinosaurs were created on day 6. But the Bible itself refers to dinosaurs, not by name. Look at Job, chapter 40, verses 15 through 19. Look at behemoth. We'll come back to that word in a minute. Which I made along with you, which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength is in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. His tail moves like a cedar. His sinews and thighs are close-knit. His bones are like tubes of bronze, and his limbs are like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God. Now, I put a picture there to kind of draw you into the dinosaur, but if I didn't have that picture and that word is just read, what image comes to mind? At the very least, it's a large creature. His limbs are like tubes of bronze. His tail moves like a cedar. And we're not talking here about a little shrub in your yard, right? Not a cedar shrub. That description implies large. So I would say possibly we're looking here at a Brachiosaurus. And here's what the cedar looks like in Job's time. It's a cedar of Lebanon. That's the cedar that the Bible describes. Mature cedar of Lebanon is a large tree. It's not the little shrub of cedar that's in your yard that the deers devour. So go back to the word behemoth. If, in some versions of the Bible, if you look in the footnotes of that section, they will say, no one is quite sure what's meant by these two words, behemoth and leviathan. And I would agree with that. We don't know exactly what it is in our words. So the English Bible leaves them untranslated. And that's where the commentators should put the period and not write anything else. But then they insert their own opinion, which says, the behemoth resembles a hippopotamus or an elephant. Where did they get that? They certainly didn't get it from the description in Job. Does that look like the tail of a cedar? No, I mean, it's got big limbs. Its limbs are like tubes of bronze, maybe, but they left out one of the key descriptors. Go to a hippopotamus. Definitely not the tail of a cedar. I would say that something like this, behemoth, probably is looking like a sauropod dinosaur, possibly even a Brachiosaurus. But I say possibly, I put question marks in it because I don't know. Nobody does, right? But God was describing something to Job, and this creature resembles the description that was written more than the previous ones. Now, it's important to then ask, well, when was Job written? If there were no dinosaurs around when Job was alive, then God couldn't be describing a dinosaur to Job. He wouldn't know what it was. But let's look at when it was written. Job 12, 15, and 22, 15 to 16. If he withholds the waters, they dry up. If he sends them out, they overwhelm the land. Will you keep to the old way that wicked men have trod? They were snatched away before their time. Their foundation was washed away. What's he referring to? He's referring to the flood. So Noah had knowledge of the flood. Would have been passed down. Job was written after the flood. That means that dinosaurs had to have been on the ark, because God's describing a dinosaur to Job. How in the world is that possible? Great question. It happens to be the next one we're going to look at. How could dinosaurs fit on the ark? Now, we might end up just focusing on this because as I ask that really simple question, it expands. It's a can of worms, right? That one question results in, well, how many animals are needed? How many dinosaurs were there? What's the average size of a dinosaur? How old were they? And how big was the ark in the first place? We'll see how many of these we get through in the time. It is important when you think of the ark and you think of dinosaurs, you can appreciate the sarcasm and the jokes in the cartoons, but you really need to separate them from what the Bible really says about this event and about the structure itself. We like dad jokes. You were telling me some dad jokes at the beginning. I love joking around. And I see the humor in that picture, in that cartoon. But it's important to remember, especially if you're talking to kids about dinosaurs, don't leave that as the final picture with it. It's okay to laugh at it and understand the difference, but we have to really reconcile the fact that some dinosaurs were huge. And if we're saying that they were on the ark, we've got to have an explanation as to how and why. Well, we know why, because God was saving them, but we have to have an explanation of how they fit. First off, it's important to remember that not all dinosaurs were that large. Some were as small as turkeys. We saw some wild turkeys running around out here this morning. Some dinosaurs were that small. The average size of a dinosaur is really more like that of a cow. So that helps with the answer. Dinosaur eggs, think of a rugby football. That's basically the size of a dinosaur egg. So not all of them were these massive creatures. And they didn't start out massive. Even dinosaurs had growth spurts. So researchers have studied the bones and have looked at the growth structure in the bones and have determined that, if Noah had put on the ark dinosaurs that were, say, 5 years old, teenage dinosaurs, they were on the ark for a year, they could have disembarked, ready to reproduce. There's no need to put grandma and grandpa dinosaur on the ark of each kind. Right? You can put the smaller ones because they were only had to be there about a year. And again, I can appreciate the humor in pictures like this. Same with this one. But it's really important, and again, especially when you're talking to kids. And I know, it's common in nurseries and churches, or possibly even in your homes, to put a nice picture of a cartoon ark with all the animals sticking out. It's fine for kids, but as soon as they're old enough to appreciate size and scale, make sure to describe to them what the ark really looked like. Otherwise, they'll be left for their life with that little cartoon image in their head, and when they get to science class in school, it's hard to reconcile those on their own. So make sure they know going in how big the ark really was. How big was it? Massive. Right? 1.5 football fields in length. 50 feet tall, basically? 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits, 4 stories tall. It was massive. You could fit 522 rail cars in volume on the ark, based on the measurements that the Bible gives, right? And you can do some estimation and interpretation of what a cubit is, but basically 18 inches. I've been to the ark, the one that Answers in Genesis has put out or has built in Kentucky, and it is very impressive to see it live. But when you compare these two views, it's important to make sure that you cancel out the cartoon image, because it's not reality. It's not even close to what the Bible describes. So the next question would be, how many different dinosaur types were there? How could you fit these on the ark? We talked about how big the ark is, but now we got to figure out how many types there were. And again, I'll reference most of the material I'm getting from this comes from that book that's out back. Genesis chapter 1, verses 22 to 25 has a key phrase all the way through it. According to its kind. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living, moving thing with which the water teems, according to their kinds. According to their kinds. According to their kinds. And according to their kinds. What does that word actually mean? We tend to think Our default, based on what we learn in science class in school, we tend to think kind equals species. But that's not what this is referring to. And I'll use cats as an example. There's 39 different species of cats. We get lions, tigers, leopards, 39 species of cats. But they're all one kind, because you can crossbreed, in this case, a tiger and a lion, and you can create a liger. This is from the Creation magazine. You can create a liger. You can cross a liger with a lion and get a liger. This happens, right? They've done this. They've reproduced according to their kinds. So kind does not equal species. And the biblical model from Noah's flood includes rapid speciation. We can look at Genesis 15, look at Abraham. He was born 352 years after the flood. It occurred when he was about 75 years old, so about 427 years after the flood, and this is what happened. He said, bring me a heifer, 3 years old, a female goat, 3 years old, and a ram, 3 years old. There was already speciation between the two. A turtle dove and a young pigeon. Already speciation between them, 425 years or so after the flood. Same thing with Job. Chapter 39, who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey? Do you give the horse his might? There was already differentiation and speciation between there. We have donkeys and horses, same kind. And Job lived around the time of Abraham, about 300 years after the flood. So go back to dinosaurs. How many different kinds of dinosaurs were there? Well, here, although we've got, 11 different dinosaur species or types, or certainly names, all those are just one kind, the ceratopsian. And relatively recent discoveries have shown that the scientists have found that a lot of the different species or types of dinosaur that have been named are actually just juvenile versions of the adult, and they've separated them into different groups or different species. They really should be the same. So it has been estimated that really there's only 55 different kinds of dinosaurs that would need to have been on the ark. Now, how many animals in total could the ark fit? How many could fit on it? Again, really good question. Well, Noah didn't need to take insects, right? They could have survived on the floating debris. He didn't need to take fish, obviously, and many of those went extinct anyway. Only 2 of each kind of land animal and birds that breathe air through their nostrils were on the ark. 7 of the clean animals. So what's the limit here? The upper limit of what's needed would be about 16,000 animals. Now think of this, though. It's 1.5 football fields in length, and it's 4 or 5 stories tall. It's huge, 4 levels. Now in science class, you would have learned, I think there was a song that went along with this, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. That was the order for for naming animals and living things. I've already said that the kind that the Bible describes is not species. And so it fits kind of in between. It's either family or genus or somewhere in the middle. And if we go to the upper limit, if we go down to the genus level, then there would be 16,000 animals. That's kind of the upper limit of what is required, or what would need to fit on the ark. It could be as low as 2,000 if it fits into the family, if biblical kind equals our family classification. I don't know which one it is, but it's somewhere in there. And if you think of the size of the ark, both work, right? Both work. I'm going to skip over, for sake of time, I'm going to skip over what dinosaurs eat and just talk a little bit about the fossil record and what does it show with dinosaurs. This is the model that we're taught about how fossils are created. Disney, the wonderful world of, it says knowledge, but I would say wonderful world of fiction. A dinosaur dies, its flesh rots away, leaving only the bones. Okay? The bones are slowly buried in layers of mud and sand. Slowly buried. Mud, sand, and bones turn to rock over millions of years, and the rock layers are worn away by wind and rain, exposing the harder fossilized bones. Though that's the simple four-step process that we're all taught about how fossils are created. What's wrong with that depiction? For the dinosaur to be fossilized, it would have to be buried so rapidly that scavengers didn't eat it and disperse it and move it all away or have it just rot away. The level of detail that we see in the fossil record implies, and I would say requires, rapid burial. Slow burial doesn't work with what we see. And here's an example. This was a dead pig that was placed in very deep waters, about 300 feet in the Straits of Georgia. Very cold water under low oxygen level. And the reason that's important is that that would slow the decay process down. Okay, look at what this pig looked like just 7 days later. Now try to imagine that staying intact to be slowly buried over time. This is just 7 days later. Marine organisms and everything decay it, rip it apart, it gets dispersed. Here's another example of a swimming school of fish that was fossilized in real time. 257 fish swimming in formation and fossilized. Does that sound like something that would happen rapidly? The burial would happen rapidly, or they would just lay there and pose for thousands of years and wait to be I mean, I am being sort of sarcastic, but it doesn't lend itself to thinking about as long periods of time. Rapid burial is important. Now, I don't have an example of this happening in my time, so we'll use a cartoon to show what makes more sense. We've got a happy, smiling fish. Everything is great in his life. Then there's an event. We've got a scared fish. Then you have the dead fish. And very quickly later, you have the happy fossil fish. It requires the right conditions for fossilization to take place. It doesn't require millions of years. And look at the detail that's in the fossil record. We have a picture here of an ichthyosaur that was fossilized while giving birth. Okay, you can see that? That level of detail requires rapid burial. It just does. We have a fossil of a fish eating a fish. Now, as a kid, I took a long time to eat my dinner. I didn't always like what Mom made, the vegetables and all the rest, but that would be something else to pose and wait for thousands of years to be slowly buried and have that level of detail showing up in the fossil record. Now, let's go back to the flood. If there was a worldwide flood, and I will accept that maybe not everybody in here believes that there was, but humor me for a second. If there was, what would the evidence be if there was a worldwide flood? Well, my guess is you would find billions of dead things buried in rock layers scattered all over the world. And you know what we find? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers all over the world. The biblical model and description of the flood and what we know would happen from that actually matches what we see. I'll take a quick look at what's called a megabone bed, a dinosaur megabone bed. There's mass graveyards of dinosaurs all over the world. More than 24 of these bone beds are actually found in Canada. That's where I'm originally from, in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. One of these measures just under a square mile. Dinosaurs all jumbled together. They're all mixed together with marine creatures as well in these dinosaur beds. The explanation from the researchers is that there was a local flood that caused this. But these are huge creatures. What kind of flood would kill thousands of them, gather their carcasses together in one place, and bury them so quickly that they can't get away? And to make it even, I don't know if better or worse, I guess it depends on your perspective, they're found in the middle of Canada. Right? marine creatures in Alberta or Montana or North Dakota, it doesn't really make sense other than a global worldwide flood. Now, I have a hard time imagining that too. But what we see as evidence is what we would expect if there was a global flood. For sake of time, I'm going to skip that one, and I'm going to jump right to this, because this is kind of the key take-home information for dinosaurs and the age of them. So we started at the beginning with some jade carvings and engravings on cylinders and things like that. We've actually found red blood cells and soft tissue in fossils that are thought to be at least 65 million years old. We found red blood cells in fossils. I did not know this growing up. Now, this all happened at the time that I was in science class at college and university. This wasn't taught to me, and it was quite an eye-opener when I eventually did find this. The lady, Mary Schweitzer, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, that is credited with finding all of this, is quoted as saying, and this is back in the late 90s, "A thin slice of T-Rex bone glowed amber beneath the lens of her microscope. Blood vessel channels snaked through a bone matrix, and tiny chambers known as lacunae, which house bone-forming cells, appeared as small ovals. Then a colleague took one look at them and shouted, 'You've got red blood cells. You've got red blood cells.' She didn't know what to make of it. They've also found, they've broken open the bone and found and dissolved the bony matrix in several different types of dinosaur bones. We can call them fresh T-Rex bones. She said it was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course I couldn't believe it. Why couldn't she believe it? She's locked into a worldview that says it's not possible, and it has to be 65 million years. That's the view she has. She can't get out of that. She said to the lab technician, "The bones are, after all, 65 million years old. How could they survive that long?" She's asking the right question, but she's locked into a view that won't allow her to think that maybe there's another answer. So how could blood cells survive that long? They can't. That doesn't make sense. Lots of different examples of this. Now, one of her colleagues, Jack Horner, is a well-known paleontologist. He said in a book that he wrote with another gentleman, he's telling the story of how this happened from his perspective. And he says, when Mary was first working on the material, she called me up to say that she had found osteocytes, bone cells. And I assumed she meant the spaces where the osteocytes had been, which is what I suggested. And Mary said, "No, Jack. Actually, we have the cells, and they have philopodia, and they have nuclei. Mary, the creationists are going to love you." And she highlights and says, "No, Jack, it's your dinosaur. It's your discovery. They know they have something that doesn't make sense from the time frame, and they don't know what to do with it." For me, when I read that and learned about this, I was like, oh my gosh, that's wonderful news. Now I have something that can help me put forward a shorter time frame, because this was the hardest thing for me to kind of grasp with, was this age of the earth. So she said, "I got goosebumps because everyone knows these things don't last that long." You're right, they don't. And this has spurned a whole bunch more research into them trying to figure out how they could last that long. Right? And they haven't found it yet. I don't have time to go through all the other slides, but the take-home message, the short answer is, they haven't discovered how they could last that long. So we're kind of focused in on and showing several different ways and opportunities for us as Christians to actually believe what the Bible plainly says. The earth is about 6,000 years old, and dinosaurs, for one of God's creatures, we were there with them. And we have a lot of evidence for that. So I'm going to scroll ahead really quick here. As you can see, there's all kinds of slides. And let me Let me go back to that one. So we asked 6 different questions. I only covered part of 4 of them. Be glad to talk to you more in between the services about dinosaurs, hopefully provide some other resources for you. But I want to thank you for coming to, I'll put in quotation marks, Sunday school. That's what this is. Definitely encourage you to take a look at the resources. Some of you have asked about purchasing already. I'm going to tell you the announcement that I'll bring forward in the main service. And the reason that we've kind of pushed people away from buying anything right off the bat, it's because there's a gentleman, I'll just say, that loves the Pittsburgh and greater Pittsburgh area. He found out that CMI was coming to West Mifflin. He called the office, because he's also a fan of CMI and the work that we do. And he said, I don't think he used this word, but I'll use it. He wanted to underwrite this event. And he said, I'm going to do that by offering to anybody that signs up for a magazine subscription, and I'll explain how to do that in the next service. If you sign up, it'll be a 2-year subscription for the price of a 1-year. So normally that's $50 for a 2-year subscription. It's now only going to be $29. And if someone buys a subscription, every other resource that they purchase is 50% off. That's unheard of in the CMI world. We don't get people doing that very often. And so someone wants to bless you guys and wants to bless CMI with getting the information out. So take a look at the stuff we have. That's why we brought more than we usually do, because we assume people are probably going to take advantage of that. We can chat a bit more in between the services, and after the next one, we'll give you an opportunity to sign up for those things. So let me pray, and then we can be dismissed. Father God, Lord Jesus, I thank you so much for everyone that's here, every family that's represented this morning. I hope and pray that some of what I said sparks an interest or more questions in the minds of those here. We just ask that you would, bless them and help them to stay true to your word. And I pray that the message that you've given me to share has been well received with gentleness and respect that I intended. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody.